General Custer. Now, there's a name that certainly conjures up images.
Oh, definitely. Usually that dramatic last stand. Yeah.
Exactly. But before Little Bighorn, there was this whole uh, quite remarkable career. Rapid rise in the Civil War, then the move west.
And that's what we're digging into today. We've got these excerpts from an interview Custer actually gave called Duty on the Frontier.
It's a pretty fascinating source. Gives us a chance to hear, well, his take on things, his fame, his actions, what he thought was coming for the plains.
Yeah, it lets us, get past some of the myths maybe, engage directly with how he saw things, events that really did shape the country.
Right. And for you listening, think of this as a way to get a handle on this key figure and the complexities of westward expansion without needing to read stacks of history books.
We're pulling out the key moments from his own words.
Our mission, then, is to unpack Custer's own understanding of his duty, of conflict, his vision for the West, all based on this interview. Okay, let's get into it.
So, first off, it's really striking how he reacts when he's called the most famous soldier.
What does he say?
He pushes back immediately. Says something like, fame is a consequence, sir, not a pursuit. Really emphasizes service, the army, following orders. That's his focus, or so he claims.
It's like he knew people thought he was egotistical, maybe, trying to get ahead of that. Presenting fame as just, a side effect of doing the job.
Could be. But then later on, he talks about his distinctive look.
Ah, yes. The long hair, the buckskins.
Exactly. And his explanation there, well, it suggests he wasn't totally unaware of his image,
Right. He mentions practicality, sure, but also the bit of dash.
Yeah, boosting morale, making the Custer name synonymous with daring action. So while he says duty first.
The power of the brand wasn't lost on him. That's interesting, how people see themselves versus how they present themselves.
Definitely. Now, his rise during the Civil War, it was meteoric, wasn't it?
Unbelievable.
Yeah.
Brevet Major General at such a young age. How did he explain that?
His words were, opportunity met preparation, and perhaps a measure of boldness. And then luck favors the audacious. Pretty much sums him up, I think.
Preparation, opportunity, boldness, and maybe a bit of divine favor. He hints at that.
He does, yeah. Providence rewarding his efforts. But he also credits his mentors, which is important.
Who does he mention?
McClellan, interestingly, said he learned the dangers of hesitation from him, but especially General Sheridan.
Ah, Sheridan. Aggressive cavalry tactics.
Relentless pursuit. That clearly became Custer's playbook, too.
You see that in the
Yeah.
battles he talks about, right? Gettysburg.
Crucial role there, turning back Stuart's cavalry. He describes the electric tension, the controlled chaos.
And Yellow Tavern, where J.E.B. Stuart died.
He mentions a grim satisfaction there, calls it more personal. A big blow to the Confederacy, of course.
But Appomattox, receiving the flag of truce, that sounds like it affected him deeply.
It really does. His description of the profound quiet after all that noise and fighting, and the immense sense of pride, it's a glimpse into the sheer relief, the weight of it all ending.
Okay, back to that bit of dash, the look. He claims practicality first.
Yeah, buckskins are durable on the frontier. Long hair is just, personal preference suited to the environment. That's the initial line.
But then he does talk about the Custer brand.
He does. Being visible to his men, boosting what he called esprit de corps, making his name mean something.
So, maybe a bit of both. Practicality and deliberate image making.
I think that's likely, yeah. Frontier life was hard. Durable clothes made sense. But Custer knew the value of perception. A leader who looks the part projects courage. That matters, doesn't it? Especially in the military.
But that image, that boldness, often led to accusations of recklessness. The interview brings this up.
Oh, yes. And Custer's response is, well, very Custer. Decisive action, he insists. Hesitation is fatal in cavalry operations.
He dismisses the critics.
Pretty much calls them armchair quarterbacks. People who don't understand split-second battlefield decisions. He acknowledges casualties, yes, but frames them as a necessary risk.
The cost of winning quickly, he'd argue. Saving more lives in the long run than being timid.
That's his justification. Speed, audacity, relentless pursuit. Those are the keys to victory in his mind. It's a defense we hear often in military history, though it's still hotly debated regarding his career.
Okay, let's shift to the Indian Wars. How does he frame the Army's objectives there?
Pretty clearly. It's about settler safety, protecting communication lines, commerce, enforcing government policies and treaties.
And dealing with the tribes who resisted.
Right, bringing what he calls hostile bands, those refusing reservations, under control. He explicitly says, civilization must advance.
So the idea of coexistence.
He suggests it was tried but failed, blaming certain native leaders. He sees the tide of westward expansion as irreversible, and the Army's job is just to manage that transition, make it orderly.
It's very much the perspective of that era, isn't it? Manifest destiny in action.
Absolutely. It largely ignores the native perspective, the displacement, the broken treaties from their side. But understanding Custer's view is key to understanding his actions.
Which brings us to the Washita, 1868. Still incredibly controversial. How does he describe it?
He calls it a decisive military engagement. Against Black Kettle's Cheyenne, who he labels as known for raids, he emphasizes the surprise attack, the harsh winter conditions.
Extends it as necessary.
Yes, necessary to demonstrate the Army's reach and resolve. He even says it wasn't a parlor social, acknowledges it was tough.
What about the deaths of women and children? That's the most troubling part.
He addresses it, yeah. Blames the confusion of a dawn attack on a, quote, hostile camp, says it's hard to tell combatants from non-combatants, calls it regrettable, a result of savage warfare.
And Major Elliott's detachment being lost.
A tragedy, he says, a fine officer, but frames it as an inherent risk when pursuing enemies who scatter after a battle. His focus remains on the military objective. Neutralize the threat, destroy their ability to make war food, ponies, lodges. A stern lesson, he calls it.
Then there's his court-martial in 1867. What was that about again?
He left his post, went to see his wife, Libbie.
And his take on why he was court-martialed.
He paints it as complex, mentions professional jealousies, people not understanding the pressures of command out there.
Were the pressures?
He cites poor campaign planning by others, lots of desertions, a cholera outbreak, says he was worried about command stability, and also Libbie's safety during the cholera.
Does he accept the verdict?
He does, but maintains his actions were driven by concern. And he points to General Sheridan supporting him later as kind of proof he was right, or at least understood. Shows the tension between strict rules and frontier realities, I suppose.
Okay, fast forward to 1874, the Black Hills expedition. The one that found gold.
Right. Custer says his orders were just to explore, map, report on resources, including potentially gold.
And when gold was confirmed?
He basically says, look, that discovery inevitably attracted prospectors. What happened next, the political decisions, the Sioux reaction that was, quote, beyond my direct military control.
So he denies responsibility for the conflict that followed.
Pretty much. Puts the blame squarely on the Sioux and Cheyenne, who were, in his view, refusing government authority and peace on the reservations. Says the Army was just responding to their aggression.
It sounds like he's sticking strictly to his military orders, perhaps downplaying the wider impact.
That's a fair reading, I think. Finding gold in the Black Hills, given the treaties, was always going to be explosive. Saying it was beyond his control seems, well, a narrow view of his role in events.
Now, what about the campaign they were on during this interview, under General Terry?
The goal, he says, is to find that large group of Sioux and Cheyenne Sitting Bull, Crazy Horse, and force them back to the reservations. By force, if needed, a decisive conclusion.
And he's confident.
Extremely confident. Praises the 7th Cavalry as the finest regiment, seasoned men, good equipment. Believes the hostiles just can't stand up against a determined, coordinated Army effort.
He mentions the plan.
Yeah, the pincer movement. Gibbon coming from one way, Terry and Custer from the other, trapping them in the Rosebud or Little Bighorn valleys. The 7th is the main striking force, meant to find and fix the enemy.
Does he seem to underestimate the Plains warriors at all?
He acknowledges their skills, yes. Horsemanship, guerrilla tactics, calls them cunning and brave in their own fashion. But he says they lack discipline, organization, the Army's superior firepower and strategy. Courage alone does not win wars, is his line. His certainty comes from a very professional, maybe conventional, assessment of capabilities.
Which, knowing what happens next, that confidence is quite chilling, isn't it?
It really is. Takes on a tragic irony.
Does he mention any potential problems?
Yeah.
Challenges?
He does. Logistics, mainly. Supplying a large force deep in enemy territory. Intelligence accurately finding a mobile enemy and ensuring they actually fight decisively before scattering. He's aware of the practical difficulties.
And his relationships with superiors?
Yeah.
General Terry.
He calls Terry experienced, capable, a gentleman. Says the relationship is professional, cordial. He executes orders. Seems straightforward enough.
What about President Grant? There was friction there, wasn't there, over Custer's testimony about corruption?
Yes, he acknowledges that. Says his duty to the truth came first. But he respects the office of president and believes the matter is closed now. Thinks Grant just wants the current situation resolved.
Does the interviewer ask about political ambitions? People often speculated about Custer.
They do. And he shuts it down firmly. A soldier's place is in the field, he says. All focus is on the campaign. No future speculation. Let us first win the peace on the frontier.
But then he talks about his wife, Libbie.
Yes, and quite emotionally. Calls her the anchor of my life. Her strength, her loyalty, her belief in him, he says it's invaluable.
The source of motivation.
Absolutely. Knowing she's waiting back at Fort Lincoln gives him solace, motivation, calls her the finest campaigner of us all, says her presence is like a sanctuary, reminding him what he's fighting for: homes, families, the future. It really humanizes him.
What about his writings? My Life on the Plains. Why did he write that?
He says it was to help the public understand frontier life, the Army's challenges, the conflicts, to give his perspective, unfiltered.
But maybe also to shape the Custer legend, a bit of legacy building.
Oh, I think that's definitely part of it. Documenting the 7th Cavalry's role, his role. It's part chronicle, part memoir, part maybe correcting what he saw as misinformation.
And his leadership style, how does he describe that?
Leading from the front, sharing hardships and dangers, demanding discipline, expecting bravery, fostering pride, competition, rewarding courage, earning loyalty in the field. That's the picture he paints.
Still believes in the cavalry charge as a tactic.
Calls it the ultimate weapon. Shock, firepower, the psychological impact. But he also says he adapts, uses dismounted skirmish lines, scouts, depending on the situation. The key thing for him is the spirit of the offensive, forcing the fight.
And the future for the Plains Indians. What does he see?
Assimilation, basically. Education, adopting civilization on reservations. He sees the nomadic hunter-warrior way of life as ending, buffalo vanishing, railroads, settlements. Says it's inevitable.
And the government's role.
To ease that transition, however difficult, he presents the alternative as just continued conflict and ultimately oblivion for the tribes. It's a stark view reflecting the policies of the time.
So finally, how does he want to be remembered?
As a soldier who loved his country, served loyally, fought for the Union, upheld the flag, brought peace and security to the frontier, a man of action, devoted to duty and his regiment. And then he adds, the rest history will decide in its own time.
Okay, so wrapping up this deep dive into Custer's interview, a few things really stand out for me. First, that complicated dance with feigned downplaying it, but clearly cultivating an image.
Right. And second, that absolute conviction in decisive action, even when it looked like recklessness. That seems core to his military thinking.
And third, the firm belief in American expansion, and that assimilation was the only future for Native Americans. It's a tough perspective to hear now, but it was his.
What gets me is the gap sometimes between the stated ideals, duty, service, and maybe the ambition underneath, and the justifications for actions that were and still are deeply controversial. It's unsettling, but it's a direct look into the mind of someone central to that whole era.
So thinking about Custer's self-assessment, his desire to be remembered for duty and service, and knowing how things played out, what really defines him for you? How does his perspective stack up against our understanding today?
It's a big question. Custer wanted history to see him one way. After hearing his own words, what's your first take on his legacy? What other questions pop into your head about him, about that time? Maybe think about seeking out those other viewpoints we mentioned, especially from the Plains tribes, to get a fuller picture.
Definitely worth doing. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.